Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the virtual plant clinic. If you notice, you will see that Dr. Lester has abandoned me today. Um, Ed McMahon is in charge of the Tonight Show tonight, not Johnny Carson. And I am Lily Browning. I am the regular co-host, as Bill calls me, of this virtual plant clinic. And Dr. Lester has committed himself to many things, so he wasn't able to, or he was committed. No, I don't want that word to spread that he was committed. He's got a lot of things he has to do. So he asked me to host today, and I have asked my friend Jim Mull from Pasco County to join us. So Jim, why don't you introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are, what you do there in Pasco County.
Well, I'm Jim Mull. I'm the Florida Master Gardener Volunteer Manager here in Pasco County. But I started my career in Extension to the north in Hernando County as Master Gardener Coordinator. And I've been doing this for over 21 years. That's where Lily and I met way back then when I first walked in that door in late 1999. And Lily and I have grown together as educators during this whole time period. And it's a lot of fun to meet the public, help you folks out with your gardening questions, problems, issues, figuring out what it is, ID, and things like that. No 2 days for us are ever the same in Extension, and that's what keeps it fun and interesting. And if I learn something new every day after doing it this many years, you will learn something here today, I guarantee it.
Yep. No, yes, that's the fun part of, even though I'm not officially with Extension, I'm with the water department. I did work 12 years at County Extension, actually in a clerical type position. This man over here was my boss. So we did work quite closely together. And I learned at least 3/4 of what I know from him right over there. Yeah, I'm pointing the wrong way. There you are. Okay, yes. And Dr. Lester's kind of hovering and stalking us. So good morning, everyone, as he put in the chat. I think what I will do is start us up. We did have at least one question come through. So I'm going to attempt to share. Now, this is my first time at the controls here. So good morning, buddy. So we will see what happens when I share my screen. Share. Okay, and let me make it prettier. Okay, can you see that, Jim?
Sure can.
Okay, so this is going to be a question. Jim asked me about this earlier. He didn't find it attractive, but it's like a purple fountain grass. And we've been asked lots of questions from lots of people. Oh, probably since February. Can I prune now? Can I prune now? Can I prune now? So believe it or not, there is some new growth under that massive ugliness there. So, Jim, can I prune it now?
Well, in Central Florida, kind of the 9A, 9B climate, we usually recommend holding off pruning till about mid-March, because we know we can occasionally get that late frost in parts of Hernando for sure. I'm in Pasco. Our cold pockets are very similar to the Brooksville Airport in its temperature. So sometimes we get a late frost in mid-March, but we're really here in mid-March at this time. The long range forecast doesn't show any major cool down. So the weather is nice to get out and garden. So this would be the time to start pruning back those things that were cold damaged or frosted back. So I would encourage people to enjoy their gardens this weekend coming up.
Yay.
Yay. Finally.
Okay, this question came to Dr. Lester from Carol. Hopefully she's watching. She sent the picture at the top left of these. She couldn't remember what we had said about these black little bugs. And this one is probably one that Jim and I got every day of the week this time of year, and I'm sure we still do. So go ahead, Jim, let us know what these are.
Well, these are coming out in mass, as you can see, and they usually like to crawl upward on stems or plant labels or even tree trunks and things like that when they first emerge. Not sure if that's some adaptation to kind of prevent herbivory or something, but they're the eastern lubber grasshopper. And when you said small, these are very relatively large in the insect world. They're about 3/4 of an inch when they first come out of the emerging from the ground. They're black, usually with a yellow stripe. Some will have a red occasionally. But as they get bigger, they'll be the size of your thumb or larger. Some will be even 3 or 4 inches by late summer, early fall. And their color changes from that black and yellow to mostly yellow with some black. Easiest way to get rid of them if they're on the ground in a cluster is to practice your tap dancing skills. Physically squish them. Spraying them when they're little can reduce them. When they're in a cluster like that, you could use something like neem oil, which is a low toxicity product. But once they start dispersing or get larger, like the right-hand side, you are what we call the 2-brick method. And what you
Maybe
do
your
is you
car.
have a brick in each hand and you get up close and or you take your clippers or the broom.
Yes, we had master gardeners way back when, and that was one of their solutions. Cute little old lady. That was how she would take care of those lubber grasshoppers, was cut them in half.
And I've been known to take off my shoe and whack them real hard.
Yeah.
When they're
then
that
you got
big.
to deal with all that's on the bottom of your shoe.
And
actually, they don't, as voracious as they look, I've never seen them like eat an entire yard out of house and home or anything.
No, but they do like certain plants like our amaryllis and lilies a lot.
Bulb plants.
Lily.
Yes.
They like those a lot. I've never seen them kill it outright, but they do a lot of.
They like to chew on them.
Chew on them pretty heavily.
Yeah. And what is the saying that I borrow from you that you borrowed from Viv Harris about when to get rid of these?
Only the good die young.
Only the young
die good.
Die good. Yes.
Sorry.
You're only going to succeed with any kind of chemical treatment with those babies, maybe. And then, like you mentioned, the neem oil, or just brushing them into a bucket of soapy water. They're gregarious in groups when they're little, then they're kind of loners when they're big, which is good because I wouldn't want to see huge groups of them when they're that big either.
Well, they're not so lonely when they get to adulthood.
Well, that's true. You'll see 2 of them. Yeah. Okay. You're right.
Just saying.
Yes. And Bill and I had a class yesterday. If you missed it, it was on Florida Friendly Landscapes Good Enough to Eat. Because over time, we're finally getting to the point where we are assimilating edible gardens and Florida Friendly kind of together. So here is, I'll let Jim, because I'm not really the edible plant person, talk about, when you should be planting. I think it's like right now, like today, or by this weekend.
Yeah, if we're going to plant edibles, let's talk about some of the veggies you can still put in. They're the warm season vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, chili peppers, squashes, zucchinis, cantaloupes, things that like it hot or can't tolerate frost. We grow those from about early to mid-March into when the rainy season starts up, which is sometime in mid-March. Because most of what I mentioned will what I say, June, yes. The rainy season begins usually about June, mid-June, and a lot of the warm season veggies will start to rot out on us during the summer months, usually past Father's Day. There's a few exceptions for the long haul in summer.
Yeah, okra. I have.
Herbs.
Yes. These are warm season herbs. Sorry.
Yeah, basil is a good one. Be careful. Try to find the the downy mildew-resistant basil varieties, cultivars out there, because basil is being hit with mildew pretty bad, downy mildew of basil. So there are resistant ones. They're worth the money because otherwise they'll just melt right out. The bay tree is actually a perennial herb for us if it doesn't get really hit by a freeze. Mint, if you plant it in your yard, you will regret it. It will escape and grow into everything else. So keep it in a container where it can't root out the bottom. So put something underneath it, like a couple of bricks. So if it hits closer to the ground, it's not going to get into the ground and take over. I like tarragon. The French tarragon won't grow real well in Florida, maybe during the winter, but the Mexican one has a very similar taste, and it will grow very, very well in our summer months and has that licoricey anise flavor, which I like. I was a kid always getting the black jelly beans and trade for the other ones I didn't like. Rosemary is a
You're one of those, huh?
Hey, someone had to be. Rosemary is a really good perennial herb. It doesn't last forever in Florida, but it'll live for several years pretty happily in our climate. Sage, I find, does well until it gets really, really rainy. So once Father's Day or so rolls around, if it kind of melts out on you, just wait till it rains stop in late September and try to grow it into the cooler parts of fall into winter. You would have protected from the cold though of winter, but good ones to plant now.
Okay. And here's some of the warm season things. And this picture, if you look very closely at it, you can tell it was not taken here. Not a whole lot of basements here. So my point, I have a couple of points in this, is that these are what we can grow now. And if you're from the north, you might have the mindset that you're going to start these things in about June or so. Now, a few of the things on this list you can, and Jim can point out the ones that tolerate our heat through the summer, but a lot of these things don't. So a lot of the idiisms, knee-high by July, that doesn't pertain to Florida. I took this picture. Jim probably knows where I took this picture. And in Pennsylvania. So knee-high by July, applies there. They were growing corn in this landscape bed. But it does not apply here. Your corn will be way done by July.
Let me just say this about corn. That is one that has a lot of insects that will feed on it. Mm-hmm. So if you are, I don't want to spray, you will not get a crop unless you're out there picking the various caterpillars off daily. Mm-hmm. There are natural insecticides that can be used to control the caterpillars containing BT or Bacillus thuringiensis. Goes under trademark names like Dipel or Thuricide. But once they start feeding, you better be pretty regular about spraying for caterpillars. So corn is hard to grow in Florida because of the insect pressures. As far as what can be grown vegetable-wise through the summer, if you plant it now, you could get eggplants to go through most of the summer. I find usually about mid-August, they just give up production. Sometimes they'll make it through into September where it cools down and dries off a bit, and other times they just are too tired, and then they're yanked and then replanted. Our various southern peas, these are not the sweet peas or sugar snap peas or the edible pod peas. These are the southern peas or more starchy.
Black-eyed peas. Yeah.
Like black-eyed peas, Crowder peas, pigeon peas. Those things will grow very well through the summer. Sweet potatoes love it hot. They will take our heat, no problem, as will okra. And okra grows fast, so you're harvesting. You got to be out there every day picking it. Otherwise, it'll be a whole bunch of kind of like toothpicks when you're trying to eat it because it gets pretty woody. So you want to harvest it when they're about the size of your index finger, maybe a tad smaller.
And I pointed this out yesterday. If you think about, the heat of the summer, June, July, August, when you think you're going to plant all these other things like tomatoes and cucumber, because that's what you did up north. No, they're taking a break by then. But when you think of okra, black eyed peas, sweet potatoes, what do you think of? Southern food, right? So obviously, that kind of tells you right there, these are the things that they had to eat in the heat of the summer.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and part of the reason why we just don't grow some of the other vegetables is a high rainfall. They're just prone to diseases.
Like tomatoes. Yeah.
Oh, tomatoes are plagued with disease issues. Once the rains begin, they tank.
So if you want tomatoes and cantaloupes and all these others, cucumbers, that's Jim's favorite is cucumbers.
Mm.
You got to do it now. You got to get it in the ground.
Yep.
Or in your container, whatever it is you're growing this weekend.
Yeah, this is kind of the cutoff right now.
Yep. And again, here's the things that'll grow in the heat of the summer. The traditional three, a different kind of three sisters there. Those are the heat-loving three sisters. And then, we're discovering more and more of these kind of tropical, almost like African type of edibles that will grow through the heat of the summer as well. Do you know a lot about any of these on the bottom?
I know more about Roselle than anything. That's a hibiscus.
Mm-hmm.
And people will harvest the calyx and use them as a cranberry substitute.
Yeah, cranberry hibiscus.
Hence the name cranberry hibiscus. Other people dry it and make teas out of it.
Yeah.
Liqueur is made out of it as well, with a interesting flavor balance depending on how what you add to the Roselle. So it makes a very pretty colored tea. It's a deep burgundy red color.
Yeah.
Not quite like wine. It's more of a claret color. Ooh, there's my big word for the day, Lily.
Claret. Wow, yeah.
It's really pretty, and it's tasty in a beverage. Usually other spices are added to the mix and sugar. There's a zillion recipes for it out there for how to make the teas and whatnot. It is, if you haven't tried it, it's easy to grow. It's kind of a pretty looking.
It is very pretty. Yeah, it's a hibiscus. So
it's a pretty landscape plant.
Mine, I had a baby one and it froze, so I'm hoping that it's coming back.
That's the only problem in the 9A, 9B climate with frost. They do tend to freeze back, but they should come back. We didn't have a very hard winter this year. We just had mostly frost, not hard freezes. But I know where you live. You're out more in the open than I am in town.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I get more freezes. Well, you have a lot of tree cover.
Yeah, and I live in Brooksville, so there's a lot of trees around me, and the homes are closer together. I have clay soil. I think that radiates more heat over a longer period of time because it stores more than the sand does. So I'm more moderate than where Lily lives. Just 10 miles away? 5
miles?
10. Yeah. So it's knowing your climate, because I know we have people from other parts of Florida. What we're saying here for the Pasco Hernando area won't apply even in like Manatee County. It's a whole different climate there. Or you get into further north than Citrus, it becomes a very different climate.
Mm-hmm. Corey's a regular viewer of ours or listener. He said the Ides of March, that's easy to remember. That's, when to start a lot of these. It's when to start pruning off the dead stuff. It's also, if you want your, what up north you would consider summer vegetable garden, now's the time to start it. St. Patrick's Day is another way to remember that, but you could do it today. Nothing bad will happen today. It is lover time. And as we told you, we have viewers from all over. So Pinellas County.
Yeah, even things in Pinellas County can be a little different depending on where. If you're in that St. Pete, downtown St. Pete area, you're just a little sliver right there that's warmer than even the rest of St. Pete.
Oh, yeah, it always is warmer. When you watch the news, the warmest, is interior, is like Lakeland. It's like really hot there. You lived in Polk County,
Yep.
It's always really hot there, but it's like pleasant there in Pinellas County. But the coldest place, especially in the winter, is always, always, always going to be Brooksville. So,
in the Tampa viewing area for sure.
But for the Tampa viewing area, we're at the top of their viewing area, but it's And I know why, because you mentioned the Brooksville Airport. That's where the thermometer is. That's where they're getting these readings. And it's kind of a low, flat area, which I'm very well aware of because my granddaughter plays softball at Anderson Snow Park. And that's all kind of that same area. You know, it's across the parkway, but it's that same type of area. And I was just there Tuesday night. It was 61 degrees. I'm telling you, it felt like 41. So it's a cold spot there.
Yeah, and it's really getting to know your microclimates because, you know, parts of Pasco, they can start veggie gardening kind of around the 19 corridor, end of February, pretty safely for the
Sure.
most part. So they get a little couple 3-week jump start versus inland Pasco, which, you know, is kind of 41 and 52. That corner coming to the east is cooler. You know, parts of what is Spring Hill of Pasco is a cold area as well.
Spring Hill of Pasco, you mean Shady Hills?
Depends on who you are and what you want to think about that area. Yes,
I'm a long timer. I can call it Shady Hills.
Okay. There's a joke about Massarock Town in there too.
Yeah, we do have a joke that we won't share about. Diana, she's talking about the lubbers.
They love crinums.
Yes, they do.
They absolutely adore them.
Mm-hmm. But I've never seen them just, you know, destroy anything. They'll have chew marks out of it, and they're kind of scary looking. They love to hang out on my screen porch, like looking in at you, and they're kind of scary, but I haven't seen them. I don't freak out too much about them or try to, you know, have much effort in doing away with them. Carol is the one who asked about the lubbers, and that's a young fiddlewood that they were on.
I don't think they'll eat that one.
They were just hanging out there. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't
using it for support.
Yeah, they typically eat monocots versus dicots.
And they do love bulbs.
Yeah, those are usually lily or amaryllis family members that they like the best.
Yep, and I'm not even afraid of them. And I'm in the lily family. Yes, very good for noticing that the planting schedule was updated. I actually had used, before we did yesterday's program, I used an older one, and then I went online and saw, oh, it's been updated, and it includes those more tropical kind of, the roselle and the pigeon peas and those kind of things too. Hillsboro, Annie's joining us. She's here every week. Okay, something's starting to eat her broccoli.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
There are various caterpillars that'll go after that. Anything in the cabbage family. By now, you should be getting a pretty good harvest. You know, if you turn the leaves over, you may find them all in a cluster, and you can snuff them out, you know, with your finger or thumb. That doesn't get much safer than that, except if you're the caterpillar, of course. But for organic sprays, again, I would go with the BT, the dipalurthuricide. That's a naturally occurring bacterium. That's a stomach poison to the caterpillars, but harmless to every other form of life except for caterpillars, including the ones that become pretty butterflies. So know your insects, but that's just going to be a moth-like creature that flies around. It's the white little butterflies you see around your cabbages, or yellow in some cases. So if the damage is pretty extensive, it may be that it's too late because, as we said earlier, only the young die good, meaning the smaller the insect or caterpillar is, the fewer in number, the easier it is to get it under control. They may be past the point of control with a chemical, even with more toxic chemicals. So it's kind of knowing where they are, but this is the time of year where insects start going after the cabbages and all. That's why we want to get them in at the right time, so we're harvesting them a bit ahead of the bugs.
Right. That's a cool season crop, and we are running out of cool season really quickly.
So remember, you know, you can harvest some of this when it's pretty young. You know, you may not have as big a head of broccoli, but it's still tasty.
Yep, see, in Broward County, it's already getting late for tomatoes.
Oh yeah, it would be late for them, I'm sure, because
Mhm.
it heats up more. Although the rains shouldn't start any sooner. It really tends to be the rains that bring them down more than the heat, from my experience. Because if we get a late start to the rainy season where it doesn't begin till the end of June, which has happened a couple of times in the years I've lived here,
Yeah,
the tomatoes keep on going till closer to the 4th of July. But
right.
that's been an exception.
People ask, what if I keep them in the shade or on my porch?
Yeah, it's still too hot. It's really the humidity and rain that kills them. Shade is, they need the sunlight in order to produce the
Mhm.
crop. You might extend it if you're keeping the heavy rains off the leaves, but it's still the high humidity,
What
during the
about
summer.
cherry tomatoes?
They typically go longer into the summer only because they bloom more heavily. And the thing is with tomatoes, once it gets above about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, the flowers typically do not set very well. And this is true of the larger fruited ones. They produce fewer flowers in general. The chances of pollination and them maturing is poor when it gets above 85. But cherry tomatoes put out a lot more flowers, so the odds are in your favor for some set. But again, once it gets hotter, the fruit set gets lower and lower.
Yeah, but people will say, well, it's definitely been 85 in New York, and I was still having tomatoes, but it gets a little cooler at night, for one thing, and it really is. It's the humidity that when tomatoes are subject to that, by the time it gets June-ish, if there's an insect that will find the tomato, they will, because the tomato is in stress. And plus, just if there's a disease, it'll get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tomatoes are really, they're from the Andes, where it's a dry climate, and we're trying to grow in a subtropical humid climate. So we're
But
pushing
what
it.
variety would you suggest? What varieties?
I don't keep any of those in the top of my head. It's somewhere in one of the facts.
Okay, which ones would you not suggest?
Easier. I don't go with the really big, beef steaky type. Those really super large ones. Those are very hard to get a good crop out of them in Florida for homeowners. Yeah. I find ones that are the size of like a tennis ball for slicing or something, or about as big as
Better Boys or Heritage or
something like that. And the heirloom varieties, they can be hit and miss production in Florida as well. I prefer the hybrids. And no, it's not a conspiracy for you to buy more seeds from a company. The way that they've hybridized them has given us a lot of disease resistance, nematode resistance. So we don't need to use any kind of chemicals to keep that away. The plant naturally defends it or is resistant to these problems. So I think from a standpoint from gardening as a homeowner, that's a boon.
Mm-hmm. And Corey says, Massachusetts is a cold spot. That's the joke. It is a cold spot.
It is a cold spot.
It is.
It really
yes.
is.
I will go ahead and admit, ages 11 through 18, I lived in Massachusetts. When it was waning, but it was still the chicken capital of the world at that point. It's kind of different now. It is. In fact, I was shocked. I hadn't been there in so long. I've been there. I hadn't driven around. And right at a week ago, I took half a day off to take my sister to get her vaccination. And when I dropped her back off, I wanted to to see if there were still some phlox growing in an area where they were 35 years ago. They're not. But I took the last little loopy road where Massachusetts kind of ends. I drove back there. I had no idea that Trillium was, bam, right up to the very border of Massachusetts. So until I went back there. And that's probably been the last 15, 20 years that way. But it's just becoming more of a little bedroom assimilated by Spring Hill kind of community. So everything changes over time. Janice is still asking about her broccoli. Should she spray it at night?
You wouldn't have to do it at night, but you could as the sun is going down. Not
Yeah.
necessary. Some pesticides are better when it's put on when it's cool.
Mhm.
That one isn't terribly temperature sensitive that way for burning the plant.
Yeah, and the broccoli really should be finishing by now. So I don't know if I would put a lot of time and energy and money into, you should be harvesting them about now, shouldn't you?
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is harvest for it, or if they don't have a head in developing, it's going to be hard to get much of a flower head in there because
Mhm.
the days are heating up and working
Yeah.
against us.
Yeah. And sometimes, and then if they start flowering, that's all they're going to do there. And of course, yes, we love bugs. We don't want to kill them all. We need them around. A lot of them are beneficial. They're taking care of the pest insects for us. A lot of them are what we call benign, but they also are great food sources for other pollinators and things. So,
Well, one concept we teach in master gardening, if you remember that pie chart, less than 1% of the insects are harmful.
mhm.
So, we use the term control. We're not eradicating all this, and we wouldn't want to. We want to keep certain things under control on our food crops because otherwise we won't get a crop, whether it's in your backyard or on large scale production. But we're not eradicating.
Yep. Nighttime temperatures for tomatoes. Yeah, that has a lot to do with it. And also it won't set fruit if it is above 70 at night. Isn't that correct?
The big problem with the heat at night is the plant is photosynthesizing. At some point, it maxes out its photosynthetic ability, but the high nighttime temperatures cause it to burn carbohydrates. And if it's cool enough, and it's down here, as I'm this head in the box, there's plant growth. But when it gets to be equal, well, the plant's not growing much. And when it exceeds that, it's like on a diet. It's losing weight, if you want to think of it. So the high nighttime temperatures cause it to burn up the carbohydrates faster than what it can make it during the day. And it all then collapses like a house of cards in the wind.
So yeah, it knows it can't reproduce, so it throws its flowers off. And
Yeah, flower production or fruit production is energy intensive. Hence that most
it is,
plants
yes.
that flower are in sunlight or at least half a day of sunlight, just kind of a rule of thumb. There's always exceptions out there, but flowering and fruiting takes energy from the sun.
Here's South Florida. She grows Everglades and other cherries here, cherry tomatoes here in Broward.
The smaller the fruit, the better it is in the heat and rain and humidity seems to be. Just because, like I said, they produce a larger number of flowers. Everglades, nice little tomato, teeny, but boy, they're loaded with flavor. And I've known some people getting them through the summer, but I don't know what their secret is.
Yeah, probably not in Broward County though.
No, further up here.
Yeah. It's your favorite. Can you grow cucumbers in a pot? I don't see why not. She tried last year. The plant grew with trellis, but the cucumber started but never grew.
You need some room. I would give it like a 5-gallon container size or slightly larger for soil volume. So that gives you kind of, if you're under that, I think it would dry out very, very quickly. Probably get very pot bound. May prevent that from growing much in the way of runners, tendrils, and things like that. Also, in pots, in veggie gardening, you need regular fertility. And in containers, you definitely need regular fertility because there's only, 1 square foot of soil or whatever that works out to be. So that's not a lot of area to harvest water nutrients. So regular fertility in containers, I like either the slow release, the BB pelleted stuff. There's several name brands. You know what I'm talking about. Usually comes in a plastic bottle and is about $20 for 2 pounds.
Starts with an O?
Hmm?
Starts with an O?
It could.
It could, yes.
Just start with a D.
Uh,
There's a couple of brands out there, but if you look at the bottle, it usually says good for 6 months. But if you turn it over, read the fine print, it'll usually tell you what temperature is good for 6 months. And that's like 70-degree soil temperature. Well, in a container, your soil temperature is 100. So if you look at the 100, you'll see it's only worth, 2 months or 1 month even, depending on the product and the coating technology. So a lot of people see that 6 months and think they're good for the whole season, and it may not be true.
Let me see. Janice, with her broccoli, she found pickle worms on the leaves.
Well, it's going to be one of the cabbage loopers probably.
Okay, yeah.
But they're going to look similar. Either way, it's a caterpillar. BT is the organic choice of sprays, or squishing them or physically picking them off and, let the birds get them, or put them in a bucket of soapy water if you want to drown them or something.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a bucket of gasoline, guys.
No, no.
Okay,
And
guys.
you don't need to go in the shed and get, Uncle Joe's malathion from 1982.
No.
Yeah. One of Jim's saying, we have right plant, right place. He says right care. He adds that to it, but also there's the right product for the right problem.
Oh, I need to add that to the list.
There you go. I thought that was yours. Maybe I made that up.
Sounds like no. Yes, I made that one.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes.
The point is, every plant, whether it's a vegetable or what, has a problem or something that wants to go after it. And I know it's discouraging to gardeners, but in the grand scheme of the planet, if we didn't have certain insects going after certain plants, we'd be overrun. Think of a lot of our invasive plants that don't have that predator-prey relationship. So this is just the natural dynamic, and we set buffets when we plant big blocks of something, and they come and they find their food source. So, corn has corn earworm, cabbage loopers are part of the cabbage family. Tomatoes have tomato hornworms and other insects like stink bugs and, spider mites and aphids and diseases. Oh my, that's just the joy of growing tomatoes, period. But in a subtropical humid climate, it makes it more of a challenge than if we were in California in a Mediterranean or almost arid climate, where diseases are far and few by comparison.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. I had the slide, but I stopped sharing it. Let's talk a little bit about, now that it's springtime, what should people be doing with their lawns?
Well, there are a couple of things. We usually wait till it starts greening up and growing again, and that doesn't usually occur till after mid-March, and the days are longer than 12 hours. Even though it's been kind of on the warm side the last week or two, we haven't seen a lot of growth in the lawns, even though we had rain.
No, I haven't had to mow mine, just the weeds.
Yeah. That's because the days are still under 12 hours. So the plant is still in that quiescent or quiet phase, or dormant, especially if you got hit by frost and it turned brown. So we want to wait till it starts turning green again until we fertilize. So that, for many of us in the Pasco Hernando area, will be about April, early to mid.
I was going to say, be careful there, Jim.
What?
Just seeing if you remember our ordinance.
I don't. Your ordinance is what? I don't remember it off the top of my head.
You got it. It's April 1st.
April 1st.
In Hernando County, we might as well discuss this. If you are here in Hernando County, we do have an ordinance with a blackout phase for fertilizing your lawn. You can't fertilize between January 1st and March 31st.
Which makes sense anyhow. So
right. There's no reason to. There is really no reason to be fertilizing. Maybe about now you feel like, ooh, I want to, but waiting 2 weeks is not going to cause any harm at all. And like Jim said, it's not like it's actively growing. Your lawn has no ability to take up fertilizer when it's not actively growing. So you come here from up north or wherever, the first thing you're going to want to do is sweeten your soil with lime. Okay, address that.
Okay. for those people, especially that lived in the New England area, that was a very common yearly thing to sweeten the soil. And I think that term appeals to us as humans. We're naturally attracted to sweet things and are more averse to sour things, especially as children. We learn to like sour things like sauerkraut or whatever. Or I love sauerkraut, but
I
that's
love sauerkraut. I didn't as a child. Yes.
if some of these are learned taste, but the point is sweet is we're all attracted to it. So when we say sweeten the soil, we think, oh, we're doing something good or something beneficial. But most plants actually, they like their roots in sour soil, or acidic soil would be more accurate way of thinking about it. The vast majority of plants on the planet want it to be about 5.5 to 6.5. And most of our sandy soils begin above 7, usually 7.2, 7.4, 7.8, which is alkaline, the opposite of where most plants want to be. And adding lime, which is calcium carbonate, also known as chalk, also known as Tums, if you buy it in the store. Tums is just calcium carbonate, chalk with some sugar and flavoring, so it's more palatable. Well, you do that to neutralize stomach acid. But in neutralizing the soil that's already alkaline, you're pushing it higher and making it harder for the plant to assimilate various key nutrients because they get locked up in high alkalinity type environment. So best thing to do if you don't know your pH is to leave it alone. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, trying to change pH downward will not work. It's kind of like taking a thimble full of water and tossing into the Gulf of Mexico. Did you make a difference? Yeah, you did, but not really much. And trying to change our pH to the acid side, you're not going to make much of a difference. So rather than forcing yourself to fix the soil, as I hear people trying to do, grow plants that tolerate what you have.
Yes, and also Hernando County, a lot of Central Florida, our main industry is, the lime rock mines. We have, plenty phosphate in our soil. That's not something we need to add to it here. Okay, the next thing they're going to want to do.
Can I also Jack, when you're irrigating your lawn, it's coming out of a limestone lined aquifer. So the water is alkaline to begin with, at 7.2, 7.4. I find it funny when I see advertising down the road from here selling alkaline water for health reasons. I'm like, I can turn on my tap and get that.
Yes. Well, the next thing after you've talked them out of sweetening their soil, the next thing they're going to want to do is apply weed and feed.
Oh, please don't. More problems have come into my office, whether I was in Hernando or here in Pasco in the 21 years I've been doing it plus, when the guys buy the weed and feed and they don't read the directions, they just start applying it. The problem is by the time we can fertilize lawns, which is really April, it's too hot to apply the weed part or weed control part of it on our lawns without it burning the lawns either partially or entirely. And it usually doesn't reach the objective that people want, which is to get rid of the weeds. They're usually too mature, or for that matter, the weeds have taken over the lawn. If you even do get some of these weeds to be controlled, notice not eradicated, controlled, you usually have big bare spots left in the lawn, and Mother Nature is going to put something back in there. And one of our colleagues, BJ, have you had BJ on here?
Yes, we've had her as a guest, and she often shows up as a listener too. I don't see her today.
BJ, who's in Citrus County as horde agent, has a great way of visualizing this. If you have a bare area the size of a dinner plate in your yard, you're going to get weeds to grow in there very quickly once the rainy season starts. So a lot of times people are trying to get rid of the weeds, don't have a plan for renovating the thin or bare spots with either plugs or patching in pieces of sod to fit. So they're throwing this herbicide out, hoping to get rid of it, and they're burning the desirable lawn back, making this dinner size plate bigger because the desirable grass died, and usually it's a spiral out of control.
You had a picture at one time somebody brought to you where side by side a lawn and the neighbor's lawn, which was as green and beautiful as can be, and that gentleman's lawn who put down weed and feed, and it was dead. Dead.
Yeah, and you should have seen how good the dollar weed in that dead lawn looked.
Yeah.
It looked fine, and that's what he was trying to control. And he was applying the weed and feed in summer when it was way too hot, and he applied it again in September when it was way too hot, and it was toxic to his St. Augustine in this case. And he was looking at a resod job. It was probably a $5,000 mistake back then. Even it was a lot of lawn.
And what does dollar weed? The people don't realize what they're telling us if they have a big dollar weed problem. How are they outing themselves with this dollar weed problem?
Let me tell you, when I first met dollar weed in my young career, I was at Chicago Botanic Garden, and we had an aquatic garden, and we were growing it as an aquatic ornamental. It grows in a lot of water. It loves it wet. Now, once it gets established, it'll take drought very, very well. It'll take heat, it'll take cold and all that. But it usually starts in an area that's wet. And that could be from soil compaction, overwatering, heavy clay soils in some cases in the Hernando area, where
Brooksville area. Yeah.
Where I live, I have a lot of clay.
You do.
There's some clay in other parts of Pasco too, but not much. Again, it likes it wet. So that may indicate a leak of the sprinkler right there, maybe, possibly. Or, you're just watering that section more than it needs, because most people kind of just turn the time clock to an hour on each zone, and they have no idea how much that's putting out. Really does a disservice to you and your water bills and your lawn over the long haul. So if you haven't calibrated your system, it's really something you should do, and you'll find the can won't lie. So 3/4 of an inch is where we.
Okay, well, walk us through doing that, since you brought that up.
Okay.
And it's spring, and it's a great time to get your irrigation system.
This is time to look at the irrigation system looked at. In first thing, when I get a call and people say I have brown spots in the lawn, I say, have you checked your irrigation system recently? I had to add recently, because some people think they checked it 5 years ago and it's going to be the same. A lot of things go wrong on irrigation systems, from time clocks failing after age, being in the humidity and the contact points corroding. Your rain shutoff device, those little clicky things at the top, they only last about 1 to 2 years before they fail. Sometimes
that's shocking news to a lot of people, but that's a test that UF ran. They put every known brand out on poles in a field. The one that lasted the longest lasted 3 years.
And that's not a long time. So if yours is over 2 years, I'd say just go in there and get a new one. They're $20. You can install them yourself, turn off the electricity. Just making sure I got that in there for the guys who don't read the directions. You know who you are watching. So a lot of things can go wrong, from time clocks. We found some of the ones that were put in the early 2000s, about 2003, 4, 5, 6. The contractor grade versions, the printed circuit boards are starting to corrode and not working properly. So they're harder to program. They don't do the program. They don't send the message on the right day or time or something. So that can happen to you. Sprinklers wear out, especially if they have gears. Sand gets in there, grinds them. We find a lot of uneven watering for lack of head-to-head coverage. But again, the can won't lie. So when people call the brown spot, getting back to where I said, have you checked your irrigation system recently? Put out cans randomly in a zone and let it run for, let's say, 10 minutes. And then measure and try to get an average. Now, the cans we usually recommend are short, like
tuna fish. Yeah.
Like that food cans. You want to put it randomly, measure. You're going to have to adjust the time on your clock up or down, so you get 3/4 of an inch in a zone. Long and short, those that pop up and don't turn. They just constantly put out a spray of water, whether it's a full circle or half a circle or quarter. Those usually need less time on the time clock than those rotors that have to come back to that area and water it. So your rotor.
Come on now, you do better than that. We want to see the. There, I just did it for you. Okay.
Thank you. See, not my first time doing that with this one. The point is, you'll find that the stationary pop-ups usually need between 20 and 40 minutes roughly to get 3/4 of an inch, and a rotor can take anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half in some cases to get to that. So if you have everything set to the same time value and you have those different spray heads like that, you will have areas being overwatered and areas being underwatered. Now, what if you have both mixed together in the same zone?
Then you have a mess.
Well, you have a mess. Those that rotate, the rotors, put out less precipitation rate than the stationary pop-ups, but now they have these where you can convert the ones that spray in this mist-like fashion to where it'll put out fingers of water. It's called a multi-trajectory stream system, something like that. And if you have Rainbird heads, Rainbird has them. If you have Hunter, Hunter has their version. If you have another brand, they have their version of that, and it goes on there and it brings the precipitation rate down closer to your rotors. So that's the cheapest way of fixing that. And yet they spray out far enough to cover. So that's your best bet.
So you're saying we only need 3/4 of an inch of water
When
per watering
irrigation,
unit.
yeah.
Yeah. Does that mean once a week, twice a week?
Depends. If it's June and it's raining to beat the band, you may be able to turn it off. Now, some people live in the royal, very dry areas of Hernando County, and you may be in that rain shadow where, from the coast to a few miles inland before you get to the Suncoast Parkway, it may not rain there, but I'm in Brooksville just a few minutes.
Yes, I know. You get a lot more rain. Yeah.
More rain.
Actually, they've averaged it out. We get the same amount during the year, but it sure feels like Brooksville gets a lot more rain. And we are on that Brooksville Ridge, right where, and it's the aptly named community of Brook Ridge is right along Sunshine Grove. That is part of a topography, the topography of Florida, and they call that the Brooksville Ridge. It's actually, a little bit of a high spot. It stretches all across the state. And the rains that start coming from the east, you may start getting them June 15th. We may be June 30th before they somehow make their way over that hump there. We'll get rains from the Gulf. That's where we get most of our rains from. So, yes, you're right. We don't, I've jokingly called it the Royal Drylands out here, but we do get the same amount of rainfall. SwiftMud is checked on average per year. But I don't water. I don't even use an irrigation system. I don't live in a deed restricted community that, comes after me about what my lawn looks like.
Well, and you also have Bahia, which can survive on natural rainfall, whereas St. Augustine will need supplemental irrigation during periods of drought, which typically are the droughtiest times of the year in Central Florida are usually starting in late March. March may or may not have rained very well going into that period.
And that's where we see our consumption rise at Hernando County Utilities. March, April, the consumption of the water that we deliver goes way, way, way up.
But this is when plants are also needing it more. In some cases, St. Augustine will need supplemental irrigation to stay alive during drought periods. So April and May are usually the droughtiest times. Bahia will go into a dormancy, so it can survive on natural rainfall. Other plants, most of our trees and shrubs, when they're well established, don't need supplemental irrigation unless it's extremely droughty. We probably haven't had one of those since the 90s that I can remember. We had a lot of wildfires in the late 1990s. and
Mhm.
Kate.
3 or 4 years ago, we had a bit of a drought, and we went on some more watering restrictions. SwiftMut, the Water Management District, put
Yeah.
us on. You couldn't pressure wash your house and things like that. Well, here's a question. You brought up jollerweed. How do you get rid of it?
Well, it depends on your turf. Different products are labeled for different turfs. For St. Augustine grass, I recommend Image. Image does a very good job. It also will control sedges. That's its primarily claim to fame for St. Augustine. However, Image is toxic to Lilies Bahia. So on Bahia, you use a 2,4-D based herbicide, such as Weed Be Gone, Trimex Southern. There are other generic equivalents of 2,4-D out there. A lot of them. It's been around since the 30s, I think.
I don't have dollarweed. My neighbor does. Somebody waters, somebody doesn't. I have a lot of weeds, and the only thing I try to get rid of are the sand spurs. And I do that just by hand pulling. I do have to figure out a better elimination method of my hand pulling, because apparently putting it in the trash bag that my husband then pulls out of the trash can was not appreciated by him. I have what they call a diverse lawn area. I've heard somebody else, another agent, I stole their term, they have a freedom lawn. And they're actually doing more research on that. Some weeds are actually good, for your lawn. Diversity, just scientifically, diversity is always a good thing. And I draw in more pollinators. I have that match head weed, turkey frog tangle, frog fruit, the billion names that it has, introduced itself in my yard. There might be about 50% of the Bahia left that was there originally. But I would never get rid of that because it attracts Phaon crescent and buckeyes and another type of little quarter-sized butterfly. So I don't live in a gated community that has really high standards about the kind of turf you have to have. And I'm happy enough with what I have. What's our term for that the master gardeners always used?
Green and mowable.
Green, mowable, looks good at 30 miles an hour.
Well, before modern herbicides and chemical fertilizers were invented, people would mix clover in with their lawns, so the clover would give nitrogen to the turf grass.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was the advent of synthetic fertilizers and herbicides that we decided to get rid of the clover.
Right.
I'll leave it
there. There was plenty of clover when we were growing up north, and I'm sure you did the same thing I did. Every kid up north has stepped on a bee in the lawn at some point or another.
I was 3 when a bumblebee got my little toe.
Oh,
I remember that clearly to this
yes.
day.
I'm sure there were several times because you were from Wisconsin, and I was from Pennsylvania. So you had 2 weeks of summer? And
on a good year.
Yeah, we had about a good 3 months. But so you run outside barefoot, all happy, and yeah, every kid got stung by the bees. But by then, that's kind of showing a good thing. Back then, people didn't go crazy trying to get rid of, every single weed in their yard. It was the way that it was. Hopefully we're coming back around to that. Here's a question about eggplants. Blooming but not setting fruit. Should she shake them up to encourage some pollination?
That pollen is pretty heavy. It probably won't move very far by shaking. Are you growing this in a screened enclosure by chance, or something that are preventing bees from getting to it? I'm a big fan of planting or having nearby our veggies, bright gaudy flowers, as I like to say, because one little flower hidden under big eggplant leaves isn't very attractive to bees to go foraging around. So having more flowers nearby will encourage it. I suppose you could use a cotton swab and try to dab it around the pollen and see if that helps. But if it's in a screened enclosure, you won't get pollinators get in there. But planting other flowers near the veggies is always a good idea.
Mhm. We
Something
discussed that yesterday. If you go back to my Facebook page, which is Hernando FFL program on Facebook, there's a recording of the vegetable class Dr. Lester and I gave yesterday, and it's broken down by the 9 principles. So attracting wildlife was one of those, and having those pollinator attracting plants nearby, it's always a good idea.
Yeah, because vegetable flowers are hidden a lot of times underneath the foliage, or very small, like a tomato, which isn't very showy to a bee scouting in the morning for telling the rest of the hive where to go. So adding more appeal is good.
Okay. Warbler sprinkler heads, is that a type or a name brand or?
Those are usually used in like nurseries and stuff. They're
Oh,
usually not used in lawns or in the landscape.
So yeah, maybe for landscape beds. Are they just like a
They're
slow?
typically not put in landscape beds either.
Oh, okay.
They wobble on the head, and that gives them more random pattern, which hits containerized plants better.
Oh, okay. So it's from nurseries.
That's where I've only seen them. I've never seen them in a lawn or landscape setting.
Are either of you aware of the historical area called the Chocochattie Savannah or Prairie? Vaguely. I mean, I wouldn't by any means, call myself an expert on that. I know it exists, but I don't know all the details about it. I know they named a school after it.
That's about where my knowledge begins and ends. So sorry.
A lawn. If it's green, let it be. Even if it's not, it's going to be green at some point. Okay, so her eggplant is in a sunshade, but wide open.
They want full sun, that's for sure. That would be beneficial if they can get full sun all day. If they're only getting half a day, they're not maybe getting enough energy to hold on to the pollinated flower, just because that's energy draining. That would be one potential. When we think about when we're growing some of this, right now the days are under 12 hours, whereas up north, wherever that's, we're growing it where the days are 14, 15, or 16 hours. So it's a big difference when you have half a day here in Florida versus half a day in the north even. We're talking many more hours. So that could possibly be it, but putting some more bright gaudy flowers, as I like to say, around veggies is way to go. Yep.
And native or Florida friendly wildflowers will get you even more of those native bees too. We tend to think, we've been trained to think only about the European honeybees, which are not native to here. They're fine. They're wonderful, and the Europeans brought them over because our native bees did not recognize the food crops they were trying to grow as, something to pollinate. So they needed these European honeybees, and they're great. But we also here in Florida have something like 400 and some species of native bees that are also out there working hard to do this pollinating. So the more native plants we get out there, the more native pollinators we're going to have out there. And that is going to be an overall success for your edible garden as well. Well, I think we have gone an hour. Mr. Mall, thank you very, very much for joining me today. And I think we helped cover Bill's program pretty well. And I will let everybody go. Bill should be back next week. Bill and I will both be back. He's always threatening us. No, he's promoting a April 1st show. And I think you'll be invited, Jim. That's his year anniversary of having this virtual plant clinic. And since it is April 1st, he's going to invite everyone who ever hosted, and you are to bring some of the craziest stories you've heard in Extension.
Some I can't tell publicly.
I know. Well, you can some of them. So, yeah, weed through those, be thinking about that. And that's going to be a good one. But next Thursday, same time, same place. And thank you, everybody, and have a good week.
Take care. Happy gardening.